Get started. There may be a few other folks joining here in a moment, but I wanted to go ahead and introduce our speaker. And Hannah, welcome to fill in some more details if you'd like. But Hannah Keltner is a landscape designer, architect with the Ecological Design Group, and she's a Little Rock native, but in her graduate studies did some work around prairie restoration, meadow restoration, and she's putting that to good use in the development of a design for the Little Rock Port Authority. And there's an area we call the Triangle, which is designated will never be developed, and the port has agreed to turn that into an enhanced wetland and along with some meadow restoration in that area. So Hannah's going to talk a little bit about her work and then some of what Hannah's doing with the Port Authority. So Hannah, glad to have you here with the Audubon Society of Central Arkansas.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Can you see my screen? Does that show up for you guys?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Wonderful. Well, yeah, like Reagan said, I'm Hannah Keltner. I'm really excited to be talking with you all today a little bit about landscape architecture and ecology. I'll talk a bit about Ecological Design Group, who I work for, dive into that relationship between design and ecology, and then, like Reagan mentioned, discuss this project with the Little Rock Port Authority, which is really exciting. So Reagan mentioned this a bit, but my background, I have a bachelor's degree in horticulture, and then I went on to get my master's in landscape architecture. And during that time, I was a graduate research assistant in meadow research, which was just my favorite thing. I loved it so much. Got to participate in a lot of different aspects of that work and management of meadows. So I'm really passionate about this relationship between ecology and design, and I'm excited to be able to talk to you guys about it today. So now I work for Ecological Design Group, which is a landscape architecture and civil engineering firm in Little Rock. Some of the kind of core tenets of our company are equitable environments, connected cultures, and impactful experiences. We have 3 different offices. Like I mentioned, we are a team of landscape architects as well as civil engineers. And we also have some ecological horticulturists, which is really amazing. I'll talk about that in a bit. So that combination of having both landscape architects and civil engineers is really valuable. We collaborate a lot on every project. And one of the ways that we collaborate, one of the aspects that we really focus on is stormwater design in our projects. Water is this incredible natural resource that's everywhere. And so we work really hard at EDG to engage with that on every site that we work on. Stormwater in particular, there's a lot of issues, particularly in urban environments with runoff. There's so many of these impermeable surfaces, all the concrete and the asphalt, and that water just, shoots off into our gutters and straight into, some creek or river, and that gets eroded away. It's carrying in some like chemicals and trash and all these bad things. So we really try to be intentional in our designs to slow that water down and filter it out as much as possible. A couple of ways that we do that are through using more permeable surfaces in our designs. So allowing that water, instead of running straight off, to slow down, filter through, get into the soil. And then whenever possible, having open detention. So like bioswales and detention ponds, which capture that water. They act as like a sponge. They hold it for a longer period of time and release it more slowly. They also filter the water through the plants, and they act as really great wetland habitat for a lot of species, especially, planting them up with lots of native plants. So stormwater is a big aspect of what we design with. And then ecology, of course, is part of our name, Ecological Design Group. And I'm sure, we're all fairly familiar with the term ecology. It's really about, relationships between organisms and between organisms and their environment. But one thing that, is kind of an important like shift in perspective is to consider humans like part of that whole system. We're just, another organism that's part of the environment, and the way that we engage with other organisms and with our environment is really important as well. And so at EDG, when we're designing, we think a lot about ways to connect people with their environment, as well as really improving the ecological health of the sites that we work on, focusing in on those kind of local conditions, studying the ecology of the area and what native plants want to be living there, but also really thinking about the cultural elements and social elements and educational elements of how people move through the space and how to tie them in more with, their natural environment. Like I mentioned, EDG has some ecological horticulturists, which is really amazing. We have our own kind of branch of the company called Native Restoration and Management, which is a maintenance company that specifically kind of specializes in maintaining these more native environments. So, a lot of more traditional landscaping companies, they just don't really know how to take care of native plants. A lot of times they'll just mow them down. And so EDG has created their own management company that really understands, they're very knowledgeable about these ecosystems and working with the natural processes, even simple things like leaving seed heads on wildflowers to provide food for birds, and leaving those stems up over the winter for insects to live in, and things like that. So really an eco-friendly mindset, using as few pesticides and chemicals as possible. Yeah, it's really unique opportunity to be able to work with them. They also have their own native plant nursery, and they manage a number of EDG projects that we've designed, but they also manage other properties as well. Here are a few images of EDG projects, just to give you a little bit of an idea of some of the work that we've done. I don't know, many of you might be familiar with the Pinnacle Mountain Visitor Center, which is a recently opened, and EDG did the landscape for that, which is pretty cool. We also do a lot of work on trails, create a lot of bike trails, and you can kind of get a sense here of how all of our projects are really, we're trying to really situate them in their landscape and make them fit into that individual environment. One project that I wanted to highlight that I think is really special is Osage Park, which is up in Northwest Arkansas. And this project was built a while back before I worked for EDG, but it's pretty amazing in that it provides really incredible habitat through this really large wetland space. When EDG first started working on the project, when they approached the site, it had this existing wetland that had been created by beavers, and EDG chose to kind of highlight that and expand it, build these really cool boardwalks to help people be able to get out into that wetland and experience it, but also expanding a wet prairie. And again, like I mentioned, wetlands really act as this sponge, and there were a lot of flooding issues in this area previously. And so by expanding the wetland area, that, slowed down that water, filtered it out, and helped reduce flood pressure downstream, which is pretty great. And also, like I mentioned, focusing on not only habitat creation, but also ways that people are using the space. So park also has a lot of great amenities for recreation and more traditional park activities as well, which is pretty cool. So diving in a bit to design and ecology. As landscape architects, a lot of times we're working in urban environments. So, downtown Little Rock or Bentonville or Fayetteville. And a lot of times those sites really are very incredibly degraded. There's not much there to start with. Might be, all paved or just basically just, bare soil. So in those situations, the goal as a designer, what you're really trying to achieve is to get as much nature back in there as possible. Our landscapes, our native habitats have been so fragmented from human development. And so bringing back in native plants into these spaces can be really valuable for wildlife as kind of connectors through the urban fabric, so that, a bird or an insect or some other kind of wildlife can have these way stations as they move through a city, instead of just being trapped to a little tiny patch of forest that's become isolated by all of this development. Another aspect of urban design and ecology, again, is stormwater. So there's so much of that impervious surface in our cities. So really emphasizing in these kind of tight urban spaces, ways to slow down that stormwater if there's space to provide that, bioswales or wetland space to provide more habitat and to filter that water as well. This is a project that I'm currently working on with EDG up at ASU in Jonesboro. It's like an art building. And the existing site, what's there currently, is just a large parking lot. And so we have this great opportunity to shape the landscape around this building. So creating as much, pervious space as possible, having these permeable pavers as plaza spaces around the building, fitting as many trees as we can onto the site and using native trees. And even here, we could only do limited planting just in terms of maintenance, but using native plants and trying to, organize those native plants in a way that's really attractive, but also would, still be valuable in some way to all the wildlife around there. It's just kind of like a practical small scale example. And then another thing that we design a lot is these like larger park-like spaces or rural areas where you're actually working with these larger natural systems that are already existing. And so a couple things of ways that we approach that. One way is that often these spaces are still degraded by human activity. So often there's a lot of invasives in there, particularly in, forests. A lot of waterways have been, eroded. And so ecological restoration is a big part of what we do in creating management plans to remove invasives and bring back native plants that fit that region and fit within that system, and restoring stream banks, planting in stream banks to reduce erosion. Also, increasing biodiversity is huge and, improving these habitats. And that can be done by just, adding back in native plants into one type of ecosystem, but also by providing more various types of landscapes in one area. So like here, having both forest and meadow, which meadows are one of those habitats that we don't have that much of anymore. And so any opportunity you have to, when you have more space to provide that sort of habitat, it's really beneficial to lots of species. And then another aspect of designing in these natural systems, particularly there are sometimes when you come across one that's really in fairly good shape. Particularly, Arkansas is a beautiful state. We have a lot of amazing natural landscapes. So a lot of the design is getting people into those spaces and allowing them to see and appreciate the beauty of our natural landscapes. So some, ways that we accomplish that is just through, having a really light touch and creating paths that move through the space, thinking about, the different experiences you have as you enter the place and move through, and what types of landscapes you're encountering at different times of your experience. But also, so in that sense, it's just like having people enjoy the beauty of nature. But another big element of it is education. And so EDG always incorporates a lot of interpretive signage into all of our projects, but also just the way that you consider the way that people are moving through the spaces and engaging with these different types of landscapes to draw attention to the value, the ecological value of these spaces. A lot of people might think a park is nice, but drawing their attention to the value that that space has for habitat, for other wildlife, for water quality, all of these ecosystem services that our landscapes can provide for us. So educating the public is a huge part of that as well. And then on the right side of the screen here, another thing that EDG does a lot of is this really large scale master planning of trail systems. So this is Crowley's Ridge Trail, which is a bike trail that runs pretty much the full length of Crowley's Ridge, which is this really unique geologic feature in the east of Arkansas, which we do a lot of work in East Arkansas. Martin Smith, who is one of the principals and founders of EDG, is from Bird Eye, Arkansas, which is right outside of Wynn. So we do a lot of work with these kind of underprivileged communities out here, poor farming communities. And so Crowley's Ridge is kind of part of that. And by creating these really massive trail systems, it allows people to experience these landscapes in a totally new way. For the most part, people probably experience Crowley's Ridge driving across it on the highway. And being able to get out on a trail is really amazing, and being able to really appreciate the beauty of that place and the habitat it's providing, the ecology, and as well as, providing a huge economic boost for these areas through ecotourism. So you're kind of providing that level of education just by experience, but also drawing in more and more people to this area to really build, people's awareness and value for this place, to protect it further, which is pretty special. So I did want to include, a little bit from my meadow work in grad school. So I spent a lot of time managing the meadows through prescribed burns and, mowing and pulling out trees and, all of those things. But also I spent a lot of time drawing in the meadow and kind of studying the forms that were there, but also the way that it changed over time with these different management techniques. And one of my big takeaways from that whole experience was just this really deep appreciation for the beauty of this wild messiness of natural landscapes and meadows in particular. And that's one thing that as a designer, you kind of come up against, particularly when you want to be designing with nature, with native plants, is that a lot of the general public has this kind of perception of native plants as weedy, or, they see a burned meadow and think, oh, that looks horrible. Why would you do that? So it's kind of this challenge to slowly over time change perception of what is beautiful and what is valuable. And that can be accomplished sometimes just as simple as creating a really clean path that moves through a wild space like a meadow. And sometimes that might be something more organized, like creating a planting design in front of a building using native plants, but organizing them in a geometric way or in a kind of more garden-esque way. that maybe can be perceived as, a little bit more on the traditional side, but using these plants that people aren't as used to seeing. So as a designer, it's like finding ways to add in that small level of organization to help start changing that perception of, what's really lovely and beautiful about these things. Because really it's the messiness and the wildness that has so much value, particularly for habitat, of, all these nooks and crannies for little critters to live in. So that's something that I really like to incorporate into my design, is trying to get as much of that, pushing the boundaries a bit of getting as much of the wildness into our landscapes as possible. So yeah, I would love to share with you all a little bit about this Port Authority project that I have been working with Reagan on. This is the site itself. It's down below the airport by the Port Authority offices and next to the river. So really great potential habitat for birds and migrating along the river. As you can see, it is currently not doing a whole lot. It's just kind of an open soybean field. And the Port Authority has agreed to not develop this parcel in the future, partially because it floods a lot. And so it would take a lot of work to make it available for development. So this is a bit of existing conditions of the site. If you look at it from here, the river is just off to the east here, and the main access to the site is from the north along this road. As you can kind of see in that photo, the site is sunken down below the road by about 10 feet. And it has these low spots that stay wet most of the time, but I believe the whole site does flood periodically. And there's these inlet and outlet structures of the way that water moves through the site as well. So we have broken down the project into phases, partially to just kind of give a sense of, step by step, this is how you would accomplish this project. But also in terms of funding, the Port Authority has a certain amount of funds. And so we've broken this into phases so that if they can only afford to do phase 1 and 2, they can always put off phase 3 a little bit longer to raise more funds later on to accomplish that. And they can still have a lot of beneficial impact just by accomplishing a piece of this project, even if they can't get the whole thing done all at once. So phase 1 is to seed the entire site with a wetland prairie seed mix, as well as a cover crop like cereal rye grain, and to provide an ADA accessible parking space and some signage about the restoration process and what's happening. We wanted to provide them with some information on how to accomplish that seeding with native plants, because particularly one of the bigger issues when you're seeding a meadow with native plants is competition control. A lot of these plants just take a little bit longer to establish, and it's very easy for the invasives to get in and just take off and take over the whole space. So by using things like a cover crop, which comes up quicker and outcompetes those invasives, that gives the native plants some time to become established, and then hold their own against invasive species. There's also little things like the way that you seed the meadow. Grasses like to be drill seeded, whereas wildflowers like to be broadcast seeded. And that can make a really big difference in germination rate. So, if you're going to pay a lot of money for enough seed to cover this whole area, you really want to get the most you can out of it. So things like seeding method and the time of year that you seed, what the temperature is outside, those can make really big differences when you're doing a project like this. And then maintenance, once you've done it, The meadow won't look like a beautiful meadow in a year. It's going to take a little bit of time and some maintenance. So again, that competition control, you have to do kind of repetitive mowing, or burning is obviously great, but often isn't, practical in certain situations. But keeping that competition down while those plants have a bit of time, a few seasons to catch up. I've also provided here a seed mix that they can purchase online from Roundstone, which is a great source of native seed. And these photos are the images of the species that are in this seed mix, which are really beautiful. And it's specifically for kind of a wetland meadow, so they can handle that, having some wet feet when it floods occasionally. So phase 2 would be to cut a channel through the site, to allow the site to have water move through it a little bit more evenly. We are working with a bit of a specialist on, they're going to do some calculations on how much water is actually going to be moving through here. How high will the floodwaters get? How deep does this channel need to be? How long it needs to be? All of those sorts of things. But here we're kind of just proposing, generally we would like it to be a sinuous channel, and for it to be fairly long and move throughout the site. And the excavated material from this channel can be strategically placed to help with phase 3 of the project, which would be to get people into this site. So this is kind of like the vision of what the site could be in the future, our kind of goal for it, which would be to provide this walking path that runs through the site. This would be about a half-mile loop. Having that excavated material would help navigate that slope so that people could get down and even have an ADA accessible access to this walk. So even people with limited mobility could still enjoy the site. There would be a concrete path with these boardwalks over the stream channel, and within the meadow itself, there would be some, variety of habitats created, from wetland prairie with that seed mix, but also mudflats that are created by the way that the water is moving through the space as well. So it'd be really great habitat for lots of different species. These are some of the materials that we're proposing. Constructing anything in a floodplain is really tricky, and I will not say that I am an expert by any means, but really it boils down to how you're maintaining these paths. Concrete is, fairly easy to clean off, and we were proposing that it would be raised up slightly on a soil berm when it's constructed, and then having those just smaller sticks boardwalk over the stream channel, because boardwalk can get pretty expensive pretty quick. So having limited boardwalk and mostly concrete paths, and then just stairs to navigate that slope. So lastly, and maybe most importantly, is the impact that this site would have. Reagan helped me out in gathering some information on the types of bird species that might use this site. There's over 70 species of birds, which is really incredible. It would be amazing for bird watchers. Some of the other restoration benefits is this project would really dramatically increase the biodiversity of the site, going from a soybean field to a wetland meadow would really have amazing results in habitat creation for waterfowl and lots of other wildlife as well. This would also be a great green space for the industrial park, which is surrounding it. So for all of those employees that want to take a nice walk on their lunch break, this place could be a great site and really improve their quality of life. And then, of course, amazing for local bird watchers, which is really lovely. And these are just a few images of potential signage options, which would show, maybe some of the birds that you could see there, but also give information on the plants that are in the meadow and why it was restored and the benefits that it has and all of that sort of thing. So yeah, it's a really exciting project. We got some promising news on it today that it will likely be moving forward. So still kind of up in the air, but definitely excited about this one. And yeah, really looking forward to it. So that's what I've prepared for you guys today. I would love to hear any comments or questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Hannah. And if you have questions, you can just unmute yourself and ask them, or you can put them in the chat, and I'll try to fill those. But I know that we got a couple already, and one of them from John is how much your work includes aquifer replenishment.
That's a really interesting question. I personally have not worked much with, work relating to aquifers. So I don't actually know a whole lot about that. But particularly in areas with, more, water restrictions and less, Arkansas is a fairly water-rich state. I'm sure that they focus on that a bit more, but I do think that that is a very interesting topic. I'll need to look into that.
And then another question from John is say a little bit more about the seeding method for the meadow restoration. You talked about seed drill, and so
let's see if I can go back to that slide. Yeah, so basically for grasses to get the best germination rate, they want to be drill seeded, which is generally using this piece of machinery that gets the seed a little bit further under the ground. And the main reason why that is beneficial for grasses is because a lot of this grass seed is very lightweight and is built to float away, which is great in a meadow, once a meadow is established and these plants are trying to spread. But when you are initially seeding, it means that a lot of times those seeds can get kind of blown away off of your site. So drill seeding them ensures that they actually are able to get established in that area. Whereas a lot of wildflowers, their seed likes to have direct sunlight. And so broadcast seeding of just, having the seed on the surface is often better for the germination of those species.
Hannah, the reason I asked the question on the seeding is that I can just see with numbers of those birds coming in, they're just going to clean house on the seeds for you. Gone.
Yeah, that's true. I think sometimes we use hydro mulch or some sort of cover over the top, but yeah, in this situation, I think that might be a solution.
Thank you. Okay.
John, and Barry was wondering on the size of the triangle and some of the estimated cost for the phases.
Yes, let me see if I have that number in here in terms of the acreage. I believe it was something like maybe 85 acres. Oh wait, here we go. 20 acres. I was way off. 20 acres roughly. So that would be about 120 pounds of seed there. I do have a cost estimate. Let me pull that up very quickly. Are there any other questions while I'm looking for this? Let me see.
Is there a long-term timeline for this project, and how long will you be able to stay involved?
We don't quite have a timeline yet. At this point, this was kind of just like a schematic design, initial ideas for the project, which we've given to the Port Authority. And I believe they're in the process of kind of nailing down some of the details, and in particular, acquiring all of the different funding pathways that they want to chase down. And so, I'm sorry about that. So the timing has not been fully nailed down. If this moves forward, we would hopefully EDG would get hired on to kind of go into creating construction documents so that we can actually move forward with making the process actually happen of it getting built, which you need like stamped drawings. But yeah, at this point, we don't have a time scale laid out.
And I'll just add, and Lynn can jump in here too. Lynn and I both met with Brian Day and Paige Sugar from who both work with the port. Brian's the executive director, and Paige does some mitigation work with wetland restoration offsets for the Port Authority. And Brian is very committed to seeing this happen. The only area where he said, he's not sure he could get the funds together is for the walkways but they want to, move in that direction and put in the infrastructure to make that a possibility down the road. But he is committed to making this happen. And Paige, the news that we got today, Paige is meeting with the Corps of Engineers, which has to sign off on that whole channel design, because it is considered a federal wetland. It connects to now whatever the definition is, the waters of the U.S. and so the Corps was very positive in Paige's initial conversation with them, and so it looks like we'll be able to go ahead, but this processes can take a while.
Yeah. So here's kind of the breakdown of the funding a bit. Obviously, that phase 3, having the boardwalk it's expensive. So it makes sense, that it could try to accomplish phase 1 and 2, which would really be incredibly beneficial for the site. And then that phase 3 can come later.
Anna, I do have another question, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
The birds that you showed, numerous of them, are either insectivores, or they eat crustaceans, or they eat fish. How do you instantly turn on food, so to speak, live food, not just seed and plants and so on? So I understand for the weeds and all that, but somehow you've got to get crustaceans in there, you've got to get worm in there, etc., and fish in there, obviously. But for them birds to then come and feed, otherwise they won't come. So how does EDG go about seeding the food, the live food?
Well, we wouldn't be, seeding in terms of an active sense. In terms of insects, those will come because of the plants, because that, the plants provide the food and the shelter for the insects. So that will happen fairly quickly, as those plants become established. In terms of the crustaceans, I'm not super familiar with the way that those creatures, move from place to place, but I would think that they might be able to come in with floodwaters and enter the site. And if they have viable habitat for them, once they come in with the floodwaters, they might stick around and provide that food source within the site.
I was just wondering if that was part of a plan to bring in food as well in order to encourage the birds.
Yeah, not as of now.
So, and I'll say just real quickly that area, there are already a lot of crustaceans in the area. And part of the reason for this whole project is the port is actively filling in another wetland that was a very good birding spot. And I have seen, lobster-sized crawfish there. and lots of birds feeding actively on them. So they are getting up from the river. I think, like Hannah said, from the floodwaters and
Okay.
establishing in them.
Thank you, Reagan. Thank you. I would just hate to see this wonderful, wonderful plan literally starving to death, you know?
Sure.
Of course,
Sure.
yeah.
So Hannah, I can speak to this a little bit, but I wondered if you had any conversations about future extension of the site.
We haven't had any, no, I haven't had any like further conversations about that since our kind of initial, very initial discussions with you guys about, you know, the desired potential for seeding other areas of the site. But again, I think a lot of that would go back to acquiring funding. So yeah, I don't know
Right.
what else, if you have any more information on that.
I'll just say that there are a number of other sites around the Port Authority's properties that will not be developed, and so those are all potential sites. Not a lot, most of them are not as good as this site, and so part of the reason to start with this one is it's a very doable chunk that's already where a lot of birders are going. It will help restore some habitat that's being lost on the other side of this railroad track. And so, but there are some other places where this could be extended. And it's kind of a mixed thing, but I mean, the port is buying a lot more land in that whole area for future industrial development. But along with that will be other wet areas that cannot be developed.
Think
And
you never
so,
said that to the wrong person?
I'm sorry. Maybe.
I don't think
Anyway, so that's so there's potential there for further projects like this that could mitigate some of that larger habitat loss. Well, Hannah, one question that I have, and I think maybe others on the this meeting would be curious about. Many of us are home gardeners and amateur landscape designers, and are what advice would you have for someone who is wanting to do some restoration work with native plants, maybe have a mini meadow in a yard? What kind of work in deciding the seed mixes, and how would you suggest someone might take some of the large scale principles that you use and put this to work in a smaller landscape?
Yeah, definitely trying to find seed sources that are as local as possible is really useful. It's beneficial for all the wildlife that want to use them. So there are, I think, websites like Roundstone and I'm trying to remember the name of the other one, but there's a number of seed sources that are, Prairie Moon Nursery is another one, I believe, that are they're at least regional. So if you can't get seed really locally, but also collecting seed, you know, if you're out and you see, you recognize little blue stem along the side of the highway and you go grab some little blue stem seeds, that's really like a great way to do it on a small scale. Although that does require some level of, you know, plant knowledge. So yeah, acquiring, you know, as local or regional seed mix as you can get, obviously knowing your site. So just the sun conditions, how wet it is, that plays a big part in what you're going to plant there. But really in terms of providing habitat, I think a big part of it is just planting these things, managing it to keep out those invasive species that you don't want in, keeping out the woody species too, to keep it a meadow, if that's your goal. And then allowing those plants to stay up over winter. That's, you know, a huge habitat benefit. So keeping the seed heads up, leaving all the stems above ground. And then if you'd like, you can cut them back in like late winter, right before spring, the new spring growth comes up. So yeah, I guess that would be my main suggestion, but really just like as much diversity as you can get in your yard is gonna be great for wildlife. So even just finding native plants like butterfly milkweed, or even like a black-eyed Susan, things like that that you can get at nurseries. But if you can get, the more diversity you can build into your garden, the better.
Thank you, Hannah. And Uta has a comment there that you can see in the chat about ordering from Roundstone, and that they to request the Arkansas River Valley ecoregion. And Cindy has a question about how water is going to be channeled through the triangle site.
Yes, so Paige sure is going to be helping more with the mechanics. I think we're considering adding a pump, but that all kind of depends on her like measurements and calculations that she does on how much water actually is moving through the site. And that also depends on, you know, the depth of the channel. But I do think there has been discussion about actually pumping water into the site to keep it wet all the time.
It's helpful. Other questions?
I just have a comment, if I might, and that is that I kind of attribute all of this to 3 people. And the first one is you, Reagan, because you started this with an email to the Arbor discussion list. Remember that? And we got a little group together, and Dan Scheinman is the next person who I would credit, because he knew Brian Day and set up a meeting with him and us. And the third person is Brian Day, who he's the executive director of the Port Authority, and he has been so supportive, and he has some money. So those people and those lucky circumstances, I think, have put us in really good shape. And Reagan, I just wanted to say thank you to you for starting all this off.
Well, thank you, Len. I think for all of us, when we have a place we love to bird and we see it being lost, it can be a good call to action. And in this case, it's been a happy call to action, and that Brian was so agreeable, and that we've been able to get Hannah involved, and I think we'll come away with a really nice new birding location for us all. Well, Hannah, thanks so much for taking time on a Thursday evening to be with us. Really appreciate your work, and look forward to seeing its fruits over the coming years.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. It was very interesting.
Well, that concludes the presentation part of this gathering, and now we will move to some Ask a Business. And